Alright trainers, I'm some Northern guy, and back by popular demand, today's video is looking back at the what if story we started a couple of weeks ago. What if Ash never met Pikachu? Honestly, I was so touched by the reaction that video got. Like, so many people seemed to enjoy it, and people were talking about it in the comments and coming up with their own scenarios for this what if and where they think the story could go. It was brilliant. So thank you so much. And some of you really didn't want this what if story to end, so in part 2, let's see if this version of Ash can win the Indigo League.
Where's North from here?
So as a quick recap, in this what if scenario, Ash didn't oversleep and he made it to Professor Oak's laboratory on time. If anything, a little bit early because he got there before Gary and chose Squirtle as his starter. And this drastically changed the events of the start of the story, the start of Ash's adventures. Although I feel like I need to reiterate a few things. I think there's a little bit of confusion from the first part of this story. Ash is a stronger trainer. He's got better Pokemon, more fully evolved Pokemon that actually listen to him. But he's still Ash, he's still a beginner trainer, he still makes mistakes like tight matchups, and, he sometimes lets his overconfidence get the better of him, and, he's like, oh, friendship, and he's still Ash, right? He is exactly the same, he's not some Tobias god-level trainer. After all, even strong Pokemon are only as good as their trainer. And even though Ash wasn't delayed at the start of his journey and was actually ahead of his anime counterpart, he still have all his side adventures, like in the forest and Mount Moon and all that. So eventually that time would get made up, and Gary and the other trainers from Pallet Town would get ahead of him, which is why when he gets to Cerulean City, Misty's sisters only have Seal and Goldeen, and why he was in the right place at the right time to get Damien's Charmander. And finally, just because Ash doesn't meet certain characters like Misty or Team Rocket, it doesn't mean that events that happen because of those characters can't happen in a slightly different way. For example, just because Misty isn't there to point out Caterpie to Ash, it doesn't mean he won't catch a Caterpie in Viridian Forest. And just because Team Rocket aren't following him everywhere trying to steal one of his Pokemon, Pikachu, it doesn't mean he won't see them every now and then. Like, sometimes in the anime, they just happen to be there, and they're like, oh my god, it's the twerp, and then they try and get Pikachu. Things like the fossil dig and stuff like that. Maybe that is how they get to know Ash and Brock, like, they just keep bumping into them by coincidence, and it becomes a joke of, oh my god, these freaking kids again. The point of that what if video, and I guess the rest of them going forward, is to look at what would happen if Ash never met Pikachu, yeah. But it's also to tell an entertaining story and to make it interesting to watch or listen to. So to do that, we gotta take some creative liberties and kind of bend things to work for us in some places. Otherwise, it would be a really boring video. What if Ash never met Pikachu? You wouldn't have a Pokemon and wouldn't be a Pokemon trainer. The end. Anyway, we ended the first part of this what if story just before the Pokemon League, and Ash is going into the Indigo Plateau Conference much better off. On his main team, he has Charizard and Blastoise, but only Ivysaur, not Venusaur. His Pidgeotto has just evolved into a Pidgeot just before he gets to the Indigo Plateau. He has Primeape, and he's got Togepi, but Togepi won't be doing any battling. Then in reserve at Professor Oak's lab, he already has Kingler because it travelled with him for most of his journey until he got Togepi. He has Tauros, Muck, and Haunter. Yeah, I kind of left it open to interpretation last part, whether he got Haunter or not, but yeah, I'm going to say he actually caught Haunter instead of just befriending it. Ash's journey through the league rounds would play out just like the anime, only he'd win them a lot easier. Mandy is absolutely destroyed by his already evolved Kingler, and Kingler dispatches Pete's Cloyster a lot faster than it does in the anime as well. And then Blastoise just washes away his Arcanine. As for Jeanette, well, with Charizard listening to Ash, it just takes 3 little flamethrowers and she is out. Which of course means he doesn't use Muck, but don't worry, Muck will get some justice, I promise. And this brings Ash up to the top 16 and his battle against Richie. And as we all know, this is where Ash loses the league in the original story. In this what if scenario, Ash and Richie have still become friends. They've still met and bonded, and the whole events with Team Rocket stealing people's Pokemon and Ash and Richie going to get them back and things like that all still happens, and they are very much good friends. Now before we go any further, I just want to say one thing, that in these what if scenarios, we're going to assume that attacks and moves and abilities that were introduced after Generation 1 are available. So things like Close Combat, or, I don't know, Flare Blitz, or Frenzy Plant. Moves like that that were added in later generations are available just for the purpose of this story. So Ash and Richie take their places on the battlefield, and needless to say, as much as I love Richie, yeah, he don't stand a chance here. Let's assume that Ash starts with Blastoise just like he starts with Squirtle in the anime, and Richie's first Pokemon was Happy the Butterfree. I think it's safe to say that Blastoise could quite quickly take out Butterfree with a Hydro Pump before it gets the chance to use Sleep Powder, which is how it beats Squirtle in the anime. I don't know if you guys ever noticed, but the rules for the Indigo League are really freaking weird. Like, your Pokemon is counted as unable to battle if it falls asleep, or if you recall it back to its Pokeball, so you can't actually switch Pokemon. That counts as a loss for that Pokemon. It's really weird. So with Butterfree down in the anime, Richie then sends out Zippo the Charmander, but he obviously won't do that here against the Blastoise, so he goes into Sparky the Pikachu. And just for a bit of drama and shock factor, Sparky beats Blastoise. Yeah, that little guy is tougher than he looks. Ash is quite taken aback by this, but he keeps his composure and sends out Ivysaur, who has no trouble dealing with Sparky's electric moves, and he's able to win with a Vine Whip Razor Leaf combo. Finally, Richie sends out Zippo the Charmander. Now obviously Ash can't switch Ivysaur out because of the Indigo League rules, so he keeps it in and tries to get as much damage off on Charmander as he can. He gets a few good hits in with Vine Whip, but ultimately the type disadvantage gets the better of him, and Ivysaur is taken out by a Flamethrower. Ash is down to his last Pokemon and he sends out Charizard. And with Charizard listening to him this time, it doesn't refuse to battle and very easily defeats Zippo. Which means Ash wins, he beats Richie and he progresses to the quarterfinals of the tournament. Richie is obviously sad, but he and Ash remain friends, and he runs up to him and congratulates him on a good battle. The two agree to battle again one day, and Richie promises that he is not going to lose next time, Ash. And they share a laugh and they leave the battlefield together. And as they do, Richie promises he'll come and watch Ash's battles for the rest of the tournament. But who will Ash battle in the quarterfinals? Well, this is where I think the story would take a huge change compared to the anime. In the last video, and on Twitter, I asked you guys to vote for what starter Pokemon Gary Oak would get. Your choices were either Pikachu, which Ash should have got, or Bulbasaur. And in quite the landslide, Bulbasaur was the winner. The reason being that Gary was bitter that Ash got to choose first and chose Bulbasaur to get an upper hand on his Squirtle. Ash picking before Gary would really boost their rivalry, at least from Gary's point of view. He'd feel undermined by a complete nobody. He's the grandson of the famous Professor Oak, for crying out loud. He should have got first choice in all the Pokemon. He'd also feel just a little bit betrayed by Professor Oak for this. Like, why did you let all these kids choose before me? Why didn't you save me a Squirtle? You know, how come you didn't make them wait until I got there to pick first? But Professor Oak isn't like that. He really wouldn't do that. And deep down, Gary knows this, so most of his frustration is aimed directly at Ash. Because of this, Gary is even more determined to be a stronger trainer and to be better than Ash. So he trains harder, he's a little bit more serious. He's still his usual cocky, confident self, but he doesn't let that get the better of him in Pokemon battles. So unlike the anime, Gary doesn't lose to Melissa. He actually beats her, and he gets through to the top 16 as well. And that's why he battles Assunta, which is who Richie battles after he beats Ash, and he ultimately loses to her in the quarterfinals. So Ash's next opponent is Gary. Now don't worry, if we get to Johto, they will still battle in Johto. Now since these versions of Ash and Gary are more confident, they're stronger, they're more serious, I thought it would be really cool to have them clash in their very first Pokemon League competition. Boosted by the fact that their rivalry is much stronger this time round. See, Ash and Gary have bumped into each other on their journeys through Kanto, just like they do in the anime. Only here, they've actually had a few battles like good rivals should. And while Ash has won some of those battles, Gary has usually been the one to come out on top. So, needless to say, yeah, this one's personal. Ash and Gary face off in Indigo Stadium at opposite ends of the battlefield, and you can cut the atmosphere with a knife. In the Indigo League, from the quarterfinals onwards, the matches were full 6v6 battles, so this is going to be the toughest battle either of them have had in the tournament so far. The referee calls for their Pokemon, and they throw their Pokeballs at the same time. Ash sends out Primeape, and Gary sends out Golem. What follows is an intense back and forth match between the two trainers, Ash's Primeape easily takes out Golem with its fighting type moves, but then Gary sends out his Nidoking, who battles really hard and takes out Primeape with a Horn attack. Ash counters right back with Kingler, who hits Crab Hammer after Crab Hammer into Nidoking until it is down and out and unable to battle. Then Gary goes into Scyther, who we can assume he has because he's got Scizor in the Johto League, and with an Air Slash and a Slash attack he cuts Kingler down to size. Then Ash brings in the big guns and sends out Charizard, who actually struggles a little bit with Scyther at first because of its speed, and it takes a few hits, but eventually it hits Scyther with a Flamethrower and finishes it off with Seismic Toss for good measure. Gary retaliates with Seadra, which again we can assume he has because he's got Kingdra in the Johto League. It's a tough battle, but eventually Kingdra washes away the weakened Charizard with Hydro Pump. Ash is a little shaken seeing Charizard go down so early into the battle, but he composes himself and sends out Ivysaur. Ivysaur gets a few hits in with Vine Whip and then starts charging Solar Beam. It shakes off a few attacks from Kingdra before it's fully charged and then blasts it away. And this is where the battle takes a very interesting turn. One of my subscribers and fellow PokeTuber, the Drew Gamer, pitched the idea that Gary catches the Pidgeotto that Ash should have caught in Viridian Forest. Remember the one that his Pidgey battled against and was defeated before Squirtle chased it away? Yeah, that one. That's the Pidgeotto Ash catches in the anime. Well, after Gary catches it, Pidgeotto would become kind of like a rival to Ash's Pidgey. It would always be one step ahead of it, and it evolved into Pidgeot long before Ash's did. And under Gary's training, Pidgeot has become incredibly strong, much stronger than Ash's Pidgeotto from the anime. So Gary sends out Pidgeot, which makes quick work of Ivysaur with a wing attack and then a blinding fast quick attack. And this is where Ash makes a fatal mistake. In true Ash fashion, he sends out his own Pidgeot, saying they're going to end this rivalry once and for all, and they're finally going to find out who is the stronger Pidgeot. The two bird Pokemon have a fierce aerial battle all around the stadium, and the crowd are loving it. And it climaxes with Gary and Ash both calling out for them to use Brave Bird, and the two Pidgeots smash into each other in the middle of the arena, and they fall down to the battlefield. And when the smoke clears, they're both down, and it's a double KO. Ash runs up to his Pidgeot while Gary simply just returns his to his Pokeball, and Ash thanks Pidgeot for such a great battle and for fighting so hard and for proving to Gary and Gary's Pidgeot that it is just as strong as they are. Do you remember the promise he made to Pidgey back in Viridian Forest? Well, it's finally come true. Ash returns Pidgeot to his Pokeball and takes his place back in the trainer's box, ready for the last round. Both Ash and Gary only have one Pokemon left. Ash sends out Blastoise, and Gary sends out Venusaur. Gary mocks Ash, laughing at him, saying he should have saved Pidgeot for Venusaur, not sending it out against his own Pidgeot to try and prove a point. He then takes it even further and says, hey, maybe you should have saved that Charizard instead of wasting it on Scyther. He's now at a severe type disadvantage, and that, Gary tells him, is going to cost him greatly. Ash doesn't let Gary get to him, and their final showdown begins. Both Blastoise and Venusaur give it their all. It is an incredibly fierce battle with attacks flying everywhere. Ash even has a trick up his sleeve here. His Blastoise has learnt how to use Ice Beam, and he's been saving it for this very matchup. Ice Beam deals a lot of damage to Venusaur, but Blastoise is equally as tired after taking all those grass type attacks. Ash then decides, okay, this is it, it's all or nothing time, and he calls for Blastoise to use Skull Bash, which is like Blastoise's version of Charizard's Seismic Toss, you know, like the really awesome finishing move. Whilst Blastoise charges up power, Gary tells Venusaur to prepare a Solar Beam. It's really tense while the two Pokemon charge up their attacks, and once they're at full power, they launch their moves and they collide in the middle of the arena. Blastoise slamming into that Solar Beam head on, and it starts pushing the beam back, and you think Ash is actually about to win here. But Gary tells Venusaur to release more power, and it just blows Blastoise away, and it takes the full frontal force of the Solar Beam. The smoke clears, and Blastoise is down, and is unable to battle. Gary is declared the winner, and Ash falls to his knees. Gary recalls Venusaur to his Pokeball and thanks it for a well-fought battle. He's a bit of a serious guy, but you know, he's not a dick to his Pokemon. He calls out to Ash, saying that he really needs to up his game if he ever wants a chance of beating him in a battle. But he softens up a bit and he recognises that Ash is really strong, and he congratulates him on fighting so hard. He tells Ash he looks forward to their rematch one day and then leaves. Brock and Richie are there to console Ash, and they try and make him feel a bit better, you know. They say like, well mate, you got to the top 8 out of like 256 people, that's incredible. And yeah, Ash agrees, it does cheer him up a little bit. The next day, Gary has his semi-final battle, and after a really tough match, he actually ends up losing here to the person who wins the league overall. As Gary is walking back down the tunnel, Ash is there to greet him, and he congratulates Gary on making it so far in the tournament, and says that it was a really good battle, he just got a bit unlucky. The two share a warming moment where they recognise each other as equals, and their rivalry, yeah, is stronger, but it's not like, it's not like they hate each other anymore. They're just kind of like, you see each other as a really strong opponent. There's a lot of respect there, you know? They both promise and agree that they will keep training, keep going with their Pokemon journeys, and get stronger, and they'll have another battle. The league ends, there's the closing ceremony, and Ash and Brock say their goodbyes to Richie, who heads off on his own adventure. Brock then accompanies Ash back to Pallet Town for the big celebratory party, just like in the anime. And I think that is where we'll leave it for now. So guys, what do you think? Hopefully you enjoyed this continuation of the first video. I know we spent this whole video looking at the Pokemon League at the Indigo Plateau, but I think there'd be so many differences without Pikachu there that I kind of wanted to spend some time on it, and they did have a bit of fun scripting that battle between Ash and Gary, I'm not gonna lie. Let me know your thoughts on Ash and Gary's battle down in the comments, and do you think it's fair that neither of them won the league in this situation? Thanks very much for watching, hopefully you did enjoy today's video, and if you did then make sure to leave a like, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss part 3. And you can also follow me over on social media to stay up to date with this and all my other videos as well. I'll see you next time, but until then, stay safe, keep training and have a good one. See you later.